What is the wish of a legend? A few weeks prior to his passing, the rock community had Ozzy Osbourne, rock's most powerful vocalist, lost its heartbeat. The heavy metal's godfather is no longer with us. At the age of 76, he breathed his last. Additionally, with it permanently closing a chapter in the history of music. However, Ozzy was never merely a performer. A storm he was. A revolution. A man who created a kingdom out of chaos and used fire to rule it. Generations of people were devastated by his death. Supporters cried. Friends froze. And his family felt as though time had stopped. Froze in place. The Prince of Darkness, however, did not go away in silence. He departed as if he lived audible, bold, and unforgettable. During those last several weeks, he asked even those closest to him were taken aback by how unanticipated and harsh it was. His one final dream was clinging to the soul. And only his life's love, Sharon, could make it happen. Raise your thumb with us before we start. Not only as a gesture, but in remembrance and veneration of the Prince of Darkness. During those last weeks, the house was silent. A gentle wind stirred through thick curtains of their rural home, but time seemed to slow down within. The globe seemed to be holding its breath. Day after day, Sharon sat next to him. His hand slipped around his once rock's most outrageous voice. Ozzy spoke softly, not because he was at a loss for words, but rather because his body simply lost the ability to follow his thoughts. Parkinson's disease was brutal. It infiltrated his body like a robber in the night, taking away his power, command, and mobility. It was ruthlessly unjust and cruel. The same man who previously jumped over burning stage soft lightning riffs and black leather now need assistance simply to sit up. On certain days, he hardly able to lift a spoon. Once, in a rare display of candor, he acknowledged for me, "The last 4 years have been absolute torture. My health has not been good." State. But his spirit was unaffected by even that anguish. His thoughts, like an elderly amplifier which continued to buzz powerfully and clearly. He was still witty, and his timing was ideal. And the naughty flame was still burning in those eyes that used to burn stadiums. He once remarked, "This body is broken," with a skewed smile. However, the brain is still having fun. Each morning he requested here just he and Sharon, no doctors, no painkillers. Together they would sit, sometimes lost in time, sometimes in silence, for hours on end. He flowed freely across decades, the harsh, cold, and soot-covered conditions of his early years in Aston Street's altercations and starvation. The recollection of his first gig made him laugh. Completely electrified, underpracticed, and afraid. He spoke in a kind tone of the Storms brothers, Tony, Geyser, and Bill, who assisted him in creating a genre. His voice would then trail off, soften, and crack slightly. He would talk about his kids. Kelly's Attia's fiery heart. Jack is as stable as a rock. Amy is incredibly strong in silence. Even the grandchildren. "Promise me," he said to Sharon one evening in an almost audible voice. They'll recall. In contrast to the flicker, it was the fire. Sharon bit her lip. This man had been sustained by her addiction, through relapses, through brilliant and chaotic nights. She had witnessed him demolish himself and then rebuild himself, but never in this manner. Never so soulfully alive, yet never so physically diminished. The body was letting go. However, the man within wasn't. Then came something she would always remember. It was in late June of 2025. When dusk descended, they sat by the window. Across the property, the sky had an orange glow. Ozzy's eyes were clearer as she looked straight ahead, more so than they had been for weeks. Slowly he turned to face her and muttered, "I don't wish for a man in a wheelchair to be remembered. I don't wish to be their source of sorrow. I wish to give them one final chance." Rumble. The starting point. It was more than a simple request. It was an appeal, a promise, a last defiance of gravity on the part of a man who had lived his entire life. Sharon did not cry. Then no, she only gave a nod. Now she just had one job. To make that dying hope for something eternal. The following morning she began creating calls, strategic ones and silent ones. Ozzy was hardly able to stand, much less go on tour. However, perhaps, just perhaps, she could restore his fire for one night. In one location God could a stage still, be commanded by a broken body. Would the Prince of Darkness make a comeback? She was unaware. However, she was going to learn, because Ozzy was still behind the deteriorating body. His last dream was now hers to bear, and there was still fire and thunder. Sharon Osbourne had been more than just a wife for more than 40 years. She belonged to his toughest guardian, his most reliable mooring, the creator of his second act, as well as the only one who saw each storm and resurrection. She had supported him through hospital hallways that reeked of desperation and bleach, through treatments that dissolved into tears, through recurrent nightmares, screaming matches, and spectacular resurgences. Ozzy was a mess. Steel was Sharon. However, the roles were now reversed for the first time. She had to deal with her disarray, and her goal was to transform a single, whispered fantasy into an unforgettable farewell. She did not even the kids should know. Like a hidden flame, she kept it close to her heart, who have to provide wind protection. Doctors insisted it couldn't happen. Friends called, "It's risky." In times of uncertainty, even Ozzy pleaded with her to forget it. "I'm done, Sharon." One night he rasped, "Don't make me a fool." However, she merely shook her head. "You're not finished. Not till the music ends." In private, she pressed more forcefully than before. She collaborated with supervisors, bargained with producers, and battled valiantly with the medical personnel to get one night approved, only one, and closely monitored. Each stride forward was a struggle. However, Sharon didn't flinch. She trusted in the catharsis and the power of that moment it might bring for all those who have ever loved him. Not only Ozzy, she wasn't merely fulfilling a dying wish, she was executing his final wishes. She was giving life to what was left of him, in song rather than words. She assisted Ozzy in practicing in whispers while he was unable to walk pain-free. When he had trouble breathing, she told him, "Even if your voice cracks, you still have it." And when the tremors, she enveloped her in his hands, which made holding a microphone feel like lifting a stone. "Let the world hear your goodbye," he whispered, wrapping his hands over his dot. Sharon was up calling doctors during those quiet nights when everyone else was asleep. In Los Angeles, organizing set lists and pleading with experts who told her that it could kill him. However, Ozzy had already passed away. What was more important to us, the way he would go, not in a hospital bed, not in quiet, but as an entertainer, as a myth. And Sharon realized that with each heartbeat break, because this wasn't just about Ozzy doing one for Sharon. Last time, giving a dying individual the freedom to decide how he wants to die was the goal. It was about giving him one more chance to shine brightly, even if it meant utilizing his final glimmer. It was about returning their Prince of Evil to the world, not as a patient or a specter of his former self, but rather as a tempest that might still tremble the sky. She put his former crew back together. The stadium was her choice. She managed every firework, every camera position, and every moment of that evening, with the sorrow of a heartbroken wife and the accuracy of a general, and she continued to it's a secret. It was sacred, not because it came as a surprise. The concert was not the only final gift. It was a farewell wrapped in a resurrection. A requiem of agony and force is thunder. And when she eventually appeared in front of him days prior to the performance, with the entire plan in her shaking hands, her voice remained intact. It takes place on July 5th. Your night, your raw, Birmingham uneasy last time, and through the layers of years and fatigue in his tired eyes of suffering, there came a glimpse of something quite sacred, a guy who was prepared to pass away, but only after singing his heart out for the final time. But in order to see why that last performance was so significant, you must still return to the beginning of it all. Due to Ozzy Osbourne's last I wish, it was more than simply singing. It was about taking back a life that had already been shattered and triumphantly rewriting its last verse. His tale, unvarnished, being ruthless and defiant, was never about getting famous. It was about surviving. Bound. Born in Aston on December 3, 1948, as John Michael Osbourne, Ozzy was raised in a working-class area of Birmingham, surrounded by soot, poverty, and the constant clang of manufacturing facilities. There were no comforts in his house. His family made ends meet, while at school he battled not only academics but also bullying, low self-esteem, and an unidentified dyslexia that caused him to feel lost. He discovered himself at the age of 17, lying on concrete floors while incarcerated for burglary. Thinking he had no future, he had been virtually written off by society. However, despite all of that, he heard music in the darkness. He clutched to it like a lifeline, not just because he heard it. There was no escape in music, it was oxygen. Then 1968 arrived, with Bill Ward, Geezer Butler, and Tony I. Ozzy founded the band Black Sabbath, that would alter history as well as music. Their 1971 first album didn't sound like anything else. Hefty, menacing, primordial. It was rejected by critics. However, a disillusioned generation's young people heard something genuine. Most believed that to be the end. However, Ozzy had a talent for changing conclusions. In 1980, with Randy Rhoads' assistance, Blizzard of Oz, a record he released with a new band, didn't just preserve his career, it made him a legend on his own. Crazy Train became a national anthem, a gothic masterpiece. Mr. Crowley, the Madman's Diary, demonstrated that he wasn't merely getting by, he was ruling. Unlike any other rock singer, his voice conveyed both craziness and melody, pain and wonder. He toured incessantly, he faltered, he relapsed, he sobbed and then got back up, and there was always music. In 1991, No More Tears served as a reminder to the world of his singing prowess and lyrical depth. In 1992, one of the most poignant ballads in metal history is Mama, I'm Coming Home, a love letter to the concept of redemption as well as to Sharon. He was a Grammy winner. Both with Sabbath and as an individual, he was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Individual performer. He received a star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood, and another in the city that had previously forgotten him, with Birmingham. However, as his impact continued beyond music, MTV's The Osbournes presented him with a completely new generation. He opened their home to the outside world with Sharon, Jack, and Kelly. Raw, disorganized, and oddly relatable, the audience witnessed not only forgetful, humorous, and loving father who struggled through home life, yet a prince of evil. It was uncooked, it was amusing, it was groundbreaking. Ozzy developed into more than just a rock star. He became a symbol of culture. And throughout it all, the honors, the recognition, the headlines, one element stayed the same. He sang all the time, not following the diagnosis, the tremors, the procedures, and the falls. Not even after he made his fight with Parkinson's disease public in 2020. For me, the last 4 years have been absolute torture. My health has not been good, he declared in a frank interview. However, he didn't even put an end to it. He released Patient Number 9 in 2022, demonstrating once more that he might still rule hearts and charts. The legacy of Ozzy Osbourne, that extends beyond his documents. He brought hope to millions of misfits, and that's where it lies. It exists in all children who felt invisible, and his scream carried their anger and grief. It can be found in 3 generations of musicians whose sound, fervor, and defiance are due to the Birmingham man who wouldn't leave in silence. His songs were more than merely amusement. It saved, it gave authority, it persisted. Thus, when he requested one from Sharon, it was more than nostalgia for the last performance. It was a holy rite. It was the heart's last beat after roaring for 50 years. It was Amen who had sacrificed all for the stage, requesting again that this stage return something. When that evening eventually arrived, 40,000 fans, when the opening notes of Mama I'm Coming Home began to play, they raised their palms in the air. It was more than simply music that reverberated around Villa Park. It was in the past. It was a legacy. It was the last note of a life that had transformed suffering into strength, cacophony into metal, into something eternal and meaning. Unaware that the world was coming towards Ozzy, one city stood in the middle of Osbourne's last curtain. Not New York, Birmingham, his hometown, birthplace, and cradle. Not Los Angeles or heavy metal. Birmingham embraced Ozzy, not just remembered him. It gave him the kind of farewell that opened its streets, its arms, and its soul. A city can only provide its most renowned son. It was referred to as the Summer of Sabbath, a comprehensive, months-long homage that revolutionized the industrial metropolis, transforming into a live tribute to its most recognizable voice. Between May and July of 2025, Birmingham was alive with memories, music, and murals. Ozzy wasn't merely, he was sanctified and praised. There were tributes everywhere. The banners of lamppost fluttered Ozzy's face. Whole structures were covered in murals, capturing his charisma offstage and his passion onstage. However, one gesture and one act towered higher than the others. One of the city's main bridges was renamed Daybridge Osbourne. It was no longer merely a bridge. It served as a conduit between the eternal icon he is and a troubled youngster from Aston, past and future become. Fans gathered there, snapping pictures under the just placed sign. Pictures, candlelight, and handwritten notes. A bronze nearby as his mouth and performance were immortalized in a meticulously detailed statue. Hands up in victory, hands wide in defiance. This was more than a simple homage. It was a city's attempt to face its past. Ozzy had once run away from Birmingham, a community that didn't comprehend him, which made him a dropout and a delinquent. However, in his last weeks, the city stepped up to welcome him, pay tribute to him, and unintentionally get ready to grieve for him. Classic Sabbath songs were played on local radio stations. Every day. Schools began offering music courses that examined his compositions. Even buses in cities, thank you Ozzy, flashed over their LED displays. The fans then arrived. They came in waves from South America, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Europe, some spent days behind the wheel. Thousands more miles were flown by others. They arrived with vinyl records, with tattoos and leather jackets with patches on them. Older fans relied on canes that contained the Paranoid's initial pressings. Adolescents had their arms freshly inked with insane train rhymes. Families showed up in t-shirts from Australia. Standing shoulder to shoulder are 3 generations. A few of even before they arrived at the concert gates, they were crying. Villa Park, the holiday location of the final concert, was turned into a pilgrimage destination. Nevertheless, nobody really understood what was happening despite the flags, the music, and the hoopla approaching. Never letting on that this was more than a celebration, Sharon remained silent. It was a farewell. Family members were aware that something was off. In interviews, Ozzy had become more reserved. He moved more slowly. His grin remained there, but a shadow lurked behind it. Birmingham, thus in all its splendor and noise, was unwittingly getting ready for more than simply a concert, but for a tribute. It was all the more heartbreaking because of the innocence and the happiness. Youngsters danced to music they could hardly comprehend. Couples held each other on returning home from local cafes. So I'm holding each other close as Mama. Unknown people told Australian tales on pavements, in buses, and in pubs. The city was drenched in hope, music, and nostalgia. A wish that perhaps, just possibly, the Prince of Darkness would howl again and continue to rage. However, storms frequently follow. This was just another one of those sunsets. Soon the Sabbath summer would bear a call as a prophecy as well as an homage, a lovely moment of peace before the unimaginable. And when the moment arrived, only 17 days later, That momentous Birmingham would not only mourn on a night at Villa Park, but it would also rise as the immortal guardian of Ozzy's fire. Because for every location he overran, every only one location, ever fully understood the stages he ruled and all the hearts he crushed at him. Birmingham, it went beyond just a concert. It was the eternal throb of a legend. July 5, 2025, under Villa Park's bright lights, 40,000 people came to see a moment that would never be forgotten. The world had witnessed the battle of Ozzy Osbourne via illness, pain, and time itself. They would now see him return home. Beyond being a manager and a wife, Sharon Osbourne became the creator of a miracle. She had accomplished the unthinkable. She got back together with Black behind the scenes for the first time in 20 years. Sabbath brought together the same brothers that Ozzy had founded their evolution: Bill Ward, Geezer Butler, and Tony Iommi. However, that was only starting. The biggest names in rock history were called upon by Sharon: Guns and Metallica and Anthrax, Judas Priest and Roses. Bands that had all strolled through doorways contributed to the construction. The Back to the Beginning concert was the name of the event. However, in actuality, it was something much bigger. A live requiem, a last act, written by fate and brought about by love. With banners in hand, fans flew in from every continent. Thank you, Ozzy, clothes and records in hand. The live stream reached millions across the globe. However, time seemed to stop in that stadium. Then Ozzy showed up in a flash that etched itself into history. Not walking, sitting proudly on a black steel throne, rolling, but not standing, like a king returning to his realm. Onto the stage, the audience burst out. A mixture of Oz, the Prince of Darkness, raised the microphone for the final time. There was thunder and tears. "Mama, I'm coming," he said first. "Home." His voice pierced the air like lightning, despite its wear. Every lyric is a farewell. With every note a wound reopened, and he then gave what would turn become his life's last anthem. Crazy Train, the first riff, essentials. Ozzy grinned as the crowd roared, a tiny sly smirk that conveyed, "This is where I belong." Just a nod, no lengthy farewell, no big speech, just a shared stillness, just tears. Finally, the sky was illuminated by fireworks. Not as a salute, but as a celebration. It was more than just a performance. It was a carved farewell, forged in memory and song, in steel and sound. Ozzy had received the one from Sharon. Anything that no physician, treatment, or miracle could do, a last instant of reality. For at this stage was the stage of a guy who once sung about lunacy, pain, and redemption. Alter his absolution this evening. Additionally, as the sparks flew from the heavens, his gaze met Sharon's as though to convey, "I'm home, I'm free." In July, he gave me one last look, Sharon would recollect later, her voice breaking. I also realized that he didn't have to speak. His eyes showed it to me. He was prepared, but it was not the globe. Shock was felt when the news was announced that morning. The world was shaken by the waves. Millions paused from Toronto to Tokyo, startled. Instantly, social media was overflowing with memories, greetings, and honors. "Thank you, Ozzy." The #sign raced to the top in more than 60 nations. It was not only a fad, it was a tsunami of sorrow and appreciation. Candles were lit, his music were blaring, and even fans gathered in unplanned vigils outside of the places where he has previously played. Many people felt as though they were losing a part of their individuality, their resistance, and their youth. One of the first people to respond was Sir Elton John, who shared a black and white image of himself and Ozzy backstage in the 1980s. He was a rebellious poet in leather and eyeliner, a force of nature, and a close friend. He wrote that it felt colder in the world today. He was referred to as the loudest soul by Rod Stewart with most compassionate heart. Paul McCartney paid homage with a brief but moving statement. "Legends reverberate rather than die. Your echo will never die." Ozzy, his bandmate and brother-in-arms Tony Iommi shared a picture from their most recent practice together, despite decades of fire and thunder. "It's so unbelievable, hero, to say I good companion is no longer with me. The giggling, the insanity, the music. We lived together for a lifetime. No else will ever exist." A full-length memorial video detailing Ozzy's trip from Birmingham's back was released by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Streets to the World stage. A special 10-hour marathon of his was broadcast on BBC Radio. Best Hits, accompanied by fan notes and snippets of interviews. ATV paused its primetime programming to air a breaking segment called "The World On as a Legend." Ozzy's shadow was projected onto London's Tower using candlelight. Bridge in the Symphony Hall in Birmingham. Times Square was illuminated across the ocean through a huge commemoration screen that displays his picture and the words, "Thank you, Ozzy." People gathered to grieve in cities all across the world. Fans in Espol organized a choir of 1,000 people to sing "Mama, I'm Coming Home" in Portuguese. In Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles was blocked off as thousands of people gathered for an spontaneous vigil by candlelight. A huge digital billboard in Shibuya, Tokyo put his name above pictures of his most famous performances. Even in times of war, agents, improvised meetings were placed underground. demonstrating that Ozzy's voice had crossed national boundaries. Politics and languages. The misunderstood had found solace in his music, the disobedient, the lost, and now they were all returning to bid farewell. However, Sharon's own tribute was arguably the most eerie. In a television interview 3 days following his death, she sat in a dimly lit room, cradling Ozzy had worn the same wedding band on her finger more than 40 years prior. She didn't say much, but every word, shaking with pride and heartache. He desired more than eternal life. He wished to be significant forever, and he does. After pausing and suppressing her tears, she continued, even when he had nothing left to give, he gave everything. At that very time, the world realized that a narrative didn't finish with Ozzy's passing. It was the last ballad stanza that will reverberate forever. The shuddering in Sharon's tone became the shudder in the hearts of millions. Not only has the world lost our rock star, it was no longer a representation of tenacity and unadulterated humanity, wrapped in eyeliner and spikes. Of a man who never allowed the darkness to fully consume him. Globally, memorial events were announced, and performers of all ages promised to pay tribute to Ozzy. Metallica declared that their next world tour would be called the Crazy Train Legacy Tour. Iron Maiden's Bruce Dickinson announced a tribute album features Ozzy's most well-known songs covered by rock icons. In a statement recognizing his influence on generations was released in an unusual step, despite his unique techniques. His devotion resonated with people's souls. Currently, arrangements for Ozzy's funeral arrangements are still being made. There will likely be a private ceremony for close family members and friends, followed by a Birmingham-hosted an international live tribute. Fans are encouraged by Sharon to light candles wherever they are and listen to his turn up the music. She stated that's what he would have wanted, not the volume of quiet. And even now he hasn't left. He continues to play music. His legacy endures. His impact is enduring. Into every shout, every riff, and every law that is broken. Perhaps Ozzy Osbourne has left this life, but he is now everlasting. The last sounds fade, and one truth is still indisputable. He didn't walk away quietly. In thunder he departed. It was no longer merely a charity performance at Villa Park. It was the fulfillment of a last, the final wish of Ozzy Osbourne before she passed away. It was Sharon who brought it about. Despite the overwhelming odds, she moved mountains, bringing together rock royalty from around the world, bringing back famous bandmates and resisting medical doubts in order to provide her spouse with the one thing he desired for the majority. One final show in the city that transformed him, encircled by thetos who cherished him. The goal was not to raise funds. It has to do with honoring a guy who had lived and breathed music, uplifting memories, and touching his final breath. With courage and stillness, Sharon Osbourne made certainly Ozzy wasn't a weak patient when she passed away. She made certain that he left it. Ash was always an artist. She didn't simply grant a wish. She completed a legacy, guarded a fire, and assisted a guy in passing away peacefully. As the he was not diminished when the stage lights dimmed, he was changed. Even though Ozzy is no longer singing, his voice can still be heard clearly in stadiums, particularly led fun among the millions of people who continue to yell his name. His final wish, the last whisper, came true. His life was chaotic, careless, legendary, but it ended quietly, gracefully, and with dignity. A last coming from the Prince of Darkness, who created an empire out of chaos and suffering Ginto authority. Music is not the only aspect of his legacy. It has to do with perseverance, a boot passion for sincere, hard-earned love that endures even after the body fails and steadfast. We appreciate your support along this trip. If you continue to observe, it's possible that someone watching this has experienced loss. Perhaps you have experienced the profound, unfathomable quiet that ensues after a loved one leaves. Like Sharon, perhaps you've held a helping hand in the last hours. Perhaps like Ozzy, you've held on to one final dream. We send strength to you. Life isn't fair. It is painful. Death also always feels prematurely, but maybe the consolation comes from saying goodbye when it's all over. It can be lovely with love. Together, let's whisper one final time. Thank you. Azieu. I hope the next planet treats you better than this one. I hope your soul rest at last, pain-free, and may your soul cry forth more loudly than before. Take a nap in Ozzy Osbourne. Power. We shall always love you.